right, we're in James chapter 5, and I want to just briefly say that the last time we were together was a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the themes of suffering and patience, being patient in the midst of suffering and challenges, whether that suffering is external or internal. A lot of us are struggling internally with our own fears and perceptions about the world around us. Others are suffering externally, being persecuted and troubled by external forces. We thank our Father in heaven right now that we are only being affected in so much as we're like Job, not Job, but Lot, we talked about Lot being persecuted in a sense because he saw the wickedness going on all around him and it tortured his righteous soul. You know, that is trouble for sure. But it's not, I'm coming after you to kill you and persecute you. Not yet. But I think a lot of us are being persecuted in a sense like Lot, as we are just looking around us and seeing what's happening and kind of losing our peace, losing our tranquility, not losing our hope. I don't want to say losing our hope, but certainly losing our peace regarding, what's happening. And then we also discussed, most especially last time, strengthening your heart. That was our last study, and I thought that was, even when I was sick, I thought that came off pretty well. That was such a great study, just talking about those scriptures that deal with our responsibility in strengthening our hearts, filling our hearts and minds with His hope and His encouragement and His word, and then the power of the Spirit that comes along beside that, like we looked at in Psalm 27. Strengthen your heart, strengthen your heart, and He, be strong, and He will strengthen your heart. That kind of thing. So that was a fantastic discussion. And then this time we're looking at James chapter 5, verses 10 through about 12, where he's talking about the examples of the prophets, because these are held up as examples for us in how we are to deal with suffering. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is the examples of the prophets, and then this most curious phrase that pops up here after that, which is, therefore, and most importantly, do not swear. That's sticking out there like a sore thumb. We're going to have to figure out what to do with that little quote there. So let's get started and take a look. So the first thing we're going to look at is this section right here. I'm going to read this for you. It's James 5 and 10 and 11. It says, "As an example, brethren, of suffering and patience, take the prophets, who spoke in the name of Yah. Behold, we count those blessed who endured. You have heard of the endurance of Job, and have seen the terminus, the outcome, the end of Yah, that He is full of compassion and is merciful." You can tell that you have seen the terminus of Yah, the end of the Lord. Many of your translations might say, you've seen the end of the matter, that the Lord is gracious and merciful and stuff. But it's a rather hard section to translate, and we'll deal with that in a moment. But the first thing that we want to take a look at is this passage right here. Now, taking the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord, he brings forth two prophets specifically. Number one in this passage is Job. But then in just a couple of sentences later, he's going to bring forth Elijah as a different example, but in a different way. Now, interesting thing, there are lots of prophets in the Bible, right? And I was asking Angela this the other day. I said, why do you think it is that he selected Job and Elijah for his discussion about learning from the prophets? Why wouldn't he use Isaiah, Jeremiah, John the Baptist? Surely he knew about John the Baptist. He was a more contemporary character, but there are lots of prophets in the Bible. He could have used Abraham. Why did he select Job and Elijah as these prime exemplars, like the perfect examples of prophets who were suffering and endured perfectly or patiently, something like that. Do you have ideas about why that might be that he would choose those two prophets? Brett, you have a microphone behind you if you like, and anybody online is certainly welcome to jump in at any time. Did you want to say something,
Yeah,
Brett?
they both suffered great loss. I mean, Jezebel was after Elijah, and then Job, he suffered
Right.
tremendous loss. But
Yeah.
they endured.
Yes, absolutely. So both of these guys suffered pretty mightily for sure. Anybody else? Comments about why James might have selected those? Preston?
Sure. One thing we know is that in the written word, John the Baptist would not be in the written word, but in the written word, Job and Elijah are exemplary, are examples of suffering. That's kind of what they're known for in a way.
Right. Yes, very true.
Job especially more than Elijah.
Job is like the prime example of somebody who's suffering in patience for sure. Anything else? Any other observations about why these two in particular?
David has his hand raised.
Oh, David does. I apologize. I thought I was associating David's hand raised with P.S. Green, and I assumed that Sorry, David. Go for it, buddy.
That's all right. I was just going to say, I think Job, the word, it's actually made it into our vernacular, is like associated with the patience of Job.
Yeah.
Elisha, I can't really say that other than that I thought he was a prophet to the northern tribes of Israel. So I associate that with Jesus coming for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Maybe there might be a linkage there, but
sure. No, absolutely. That's a good insight. Anybody else? Think about what each is suffering from. These guys suffered, but they suffered differently from one another. What did Job suffer from? Gracie?
Calamity with his family that the Lord allowed with no human input.
Suffering calamity at the hands of forces completely outside his control. It almost seemed like supernatural forces. A great wind comes and knocks down the house where all of his children are hanging out. Raiders come from neighboring, probably Amalekites, come and steal all of his animals away. So things that are completely outside of his control just come and take away everything that he owns. That's very external to him. Even his own health was touched to a certain degree. Right. Now think about Elijah, for example. Where is his suffering coming from?
Government.
Well, you could say government, then that would be an accurate representation for sure. But you think also it's quote unquote within the faith family. Okay, the Israelites at this time are syncretistic. They're worshiping both Yah and all these other false gods. Okay, and so when you show up and you say you're not supposed to be doing that, you get persecuted. So Elijah is suffering persecution at the hands of quote unquote religious people, which we see very often. And especially now, I think, Brett, you had a good point when you said that they're suffering at the hands of government. And that's primarily not because I think that if Elijah, for example, had been down at the river, bringing all these peasants and the normal people to repentance, the leadership probably wouldn't have a whole lot to say about that. But when you're acting like Elijah and John the Baptist and you're saying you, and you're pointing your finger at those leaders and you're making a public spectacle of them, you're embarrassing them, you're causing trouble politically, that's where you're going to get some persecution. Now, is that legitimate? that that is where it always starts, is from the top down, right? That's the way Yah considers it. He considers it from the top down. Yes, it needs to be affecting all the vertical structure of a society where, Elijah was out there baptizing everybody, but he got himself in trouble and got himself killed by criticizing Herod in particular. So the difference, Angela?
Did you mean to say that just now?
I'm sorry, did I say something?
Elijah got himself killed by Herod?
Yes? John the Baptist, sorry, they're the same thing, right?
Yeah.
John the Baptist got killed by Herod. Yes, that is correct. Yes, I think of these two interchangeably sometimes. But I think you kind of want to look at, one is suffering from external sources, which is Job, and one is suffering from within the family of faith or government persecution. One is suffering persecution in particular, and one is suffering from just weird, bad stuff just happening, right? It's supernatural. I heard somebody say last night, if you get struck by lightning, that's not terribly unusual. But if your whole family gets struck by lightning on separate days, you might begin to wonder if something unusual is happening. But remember that most of the prophets are speaking the truth in boldness, right? They are seemingly unafraid of the repercussions of their speech. They are definitely persecuted. Many died according to tradition. We don't have a lot of information in the Bible itself about prophets being persecuted. We know that they were persecution. There was persecution in the Bible, but we don't have specific information about them being killed. That's not in the textual record. However, Yeshua himself says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you've persecuted all the prophets," and talks about killing. The book of Hebrews, for example, also talks about people being sawn into. This is a quote from the Talmudic writings and the mythology, the legends of Judaism that says that, yes, most of the prophets were killed. It's just not written in the text for us. But apparently the author of Hebrews was very familiar with that. It is one of those mythological legends that Isaiah, for example, was sawn into inside of a log. I'm sure you probably heard that. But we don't have a textual record in the Bible of that. But the author of Hebrews apparently believed it at the time that he was writing. So many of these prophets died because of the things that they did. Now, when I go back to the question of why did James choose these two particular prophets as examples for us, he says, as an example, brethren, of suffering and patience, take these guys. Take the prophets. He says the prophets in general, but again starts talking about two in particular. Now, Mike, please.
Is Elijah being connected to that section, or is he being connected to the prayer and faith in the following verses?
Yes, I think that's an excellent question, Mike, and I would say that no, not explicitly. I would say that Elijah is not explicitly connected as an example of a prophet that we should take as being demonstrating patience and suffering. However, he does say take the prophets and then start talking about Job, and then just within a couple of sentences starts talking about Elijah, but within a different context. So I might be stretching it slightly to say that Elijah is directly related to this example of patience, but I wouldn't say completely. And I'll tell you why. When you think about the end of the matter for both of those guys, and this is kind of the point that I was wanting to get to here after we discussed that a little bit. How did things end for both of those guys? Really good. That's, I think, the point that I think James would have. That's why, Mike, I think that James was bringing up these two prophets as an example, and that we would think of that. Yes, he does bring some additional context around the prayer of Elijah, especially.
And I'm wondering if it has to do with those two, the outcomes were good for both, and perhaps the connection that's being made is patience and faith.
Yes.
Right? Because the prayers that are being asked here, it's in the context of Elijah being a man of faith and spirit and,
Right.
and these things. Right?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great insight, great connection. So I would say when you look at Elijah and Job, you see a really good outcome with each of them. That's why they are really good examples of suffering and patience. Now, what's interesting is when you look at the outcome of both of them and you look at their historicity, where they fall on the historical timeline, Job suffered greatly, but at the end of his life, at the end of this difficulty, he had everything restored to him. This is essentially almost, you could be read as a prophecy of restoration. Okay? And you would look at Job as a perfect example of, bad things just happening. You're not exactly sure why. You're patient and you're faithful in the midst of all this dramatic and just crazy suffering. And then Yah steps in, vindicates you, and restores you completely with twice as much as you had before. Double portion. Mike?
Do you think there's any other connection between these two guys? Do we know anything about Job's lineage?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Elijah is not tied to any one of the tribes, right?
That's my understanding. Well, that's an understanding that I have heard before, is that it's really difficult to tie Elijah to one of the tribes. In fact, he's called the Tishbite. Nobody really is sure what that means. Some have speculated, and you've probably heard some of this speculation, that he was actually a Gentile prophet who's not an Israelite at all, which is certainly curious. I don't know how you could prove that. And then, of course, Job, I'm sure you're probably aware, Job is the oldest book in the Bible. It pre-exists all of the other books of the Bible. So now, some people will say, well, we don't even know if Job was a real person. Well, I think that's kind of beside the point. Whether it's a parable, it's actually written like an epic poem, like Beowulf or something. It's certainly emblematic and is a teaching tool. Whether Job was an actual real person that someone dramatized, maybe some bad stuff happened to a real guy named Job, and the Lord blessed him and restored him after the end of it, and it was just anthologized in a big, epic poem. I don't know, and I frankly don't care. I think that Job is a perfect example, whether he was a real guy or not. But the point I guess I would make is to look at the end of this matter and say that Job comes first and he gets full restoration with a double portion. And then Elijah, what does he experience at the end of his life, so to speak? Resurrection. He is translated without suffering death. So you've got two really interesting examples being discussed here. And I think that those are two things that we can really hold on to as we look at these two guys who suffered greatly and were patient in the midst of it. And one was restored twofold, and the other was directly translated into heaven without tasting death. Those are two ends that you would look at and say, wow, yeah, that's a fantastic example. I don't think it would have been great for James to say, well, take Isaiah as an example of a great suffering prophet. It's like, oh, what are you saying? That we should just hang in there because we're likely to be killed? It's just not practical to say, hang in there like this prophet who was killed. Hang in there like that prophet who was killed. Hang in there like this prophet who got tortured and died. I think he's being practical, but I also think he's being entirely spiritual too, because I think these two prophets represent some very interesting things. It's also interesting to consider Job as a prophet. I mean, I don't know if you considered that, but is Job a prophet? Do you think Job is a prophet, Tracy?
I don't know. I mean, I would say yes, but I can't say why I think that. But I was just going to mention that in the Septuagint, to answer Mike's question, it's not in our regular translations, but in the Septuagint, Job 42:17 calls Job's father a son of Esau.
Mm.
So according to the Septuagint, he looks like he's a descendant of Esau.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating.
You know, the only reason I was bringing this up is wondering, in addition to what you've kind of brought forth in this analogy with these two men that have patience and faith and had a good outcome, maybe the fact that their lineage and heritage is kind of unknown makes that relatable to anyone. You know, not just, you know, the house of Israel and not just a Gentile people, but really anyone that's following after God.
Yeah, that's a great insight. That is a great insight. Absolutely, I like that. You know, I want to bring your attention to, you know, behold, we count those blessed who endured. I don't know about you, but that passage, that phrase, sat a little weird with me for whatever reason. I was thinking to myself, do we count them blessed? Do you count the prophets blessed? Why do you count the prophets blessed?
Because their end is going to be wonderful.
Okay, so Brett says because their end is going to be wonderful. We have, and I think that's right, we have in our mind a perception that a prophet, and Tracy hit on this in a second, and I'll touch on this briefly regarding whether Job is actually a prophet, but we have this perception that prophets are, if nothing else, fiercely fervent about their service to Elohim, right? They're very fierce in their devotion to God, and they are fearless in speaking his truth, regardless of the consequences. And we look at that and we say, that is the mark of a person who is blessed. No matter what happens to them in the midst of this crooked and perverse generation in which they lived, their reward will be great because of those two things. They had a heart that was after Yah fiercely and without fear. Those are the two things that we attach to the prophets, just in general. And we consider them to be blessed because those are the two things that we see as the things that most likely Father will reward with great, great reward. Fiercely loyal to him without fear of anything else, speaking his truth without fear. And I think that this is the part where we kind of think about, well, what is a prophet? I think, unfortunately, our backgrounds, a lot of times, because we're not very well grounded in the Bible just in general, but also in the Torah and the prophets and the writings, that we don't really recognize, and in fact kind of tend to have a miscommunication in our own minds and with each other, that the idea that a prophet is somebody who foretells the future. That's just not so. A prophet, according to the Bible, is someone who speaks Yah's words. And that prophet doesn't even need to hear from Yah directly. You know what I'm saying? I think we have this perception in our mind that you're going to get some weird, enigmatic, mystical connection with Father, and you're going to start speaking in some kind of weird ecstatic utterance or something. And that certainly could happen. And it did happen. Think about what happened to Saul when he was trying to find, some stuff, and he went down on the side of the road naked and was prophesying. But consider this, that a prophet biblically, especially in the New Testament, the office of a prophet seems to have kind of morphed over time, so to speak. That especially in the New Testament times, a prophet was considered anyone who spoke the truth regarding Yah's words. So if you are speaking the truth, you are reading it directly from Yah, and you are speaking his truth directly from his word, you could very well be considered a prophet. Now, I know that strikes you as odd and unusual, and you think that a prophet needs to have supernatural powers, or he needs to hear directly from the Father, or he needs to be able to foretell the future. Remember the purpose from Deuteronomy 13:18 of why a prophet would ever have some kind of supernatural sign. Why is that? Anyone? Preston?
Oh, I was going to touch upon something earlier. Jesus mentions two prophets, one of which would be unusual, Abel,
Yeah.
when he's saying all the prophets, the blood will come upon this generation.
From
Abel's a
righteous
prophet. We
Abel.
don't think
Yeah.
of Abel really as a prophet. He's
Right.
called a prophet.
Right.
And he also mentions Zechariah. Zechariah might be the only prophet that is actually in the Old Testament, and he is stoned in 2 Chronicles 24.
Excellent.
Yeah, one verse.
Yep.
Yes. Also, the office of a prophet in Samuel, it's rendered in English. I don't know what it says in Hebrew, but it's that he's called a prophet, but it says formerly seer.
Right.
And if you notice, it was a seer kind of was the original word, and the prophet kind of took over the office. And there was some distinction between them, but they sort of melded together over the years.
Yeah, that's an excellent insight. And go ahead,
And
Gracie.
one more
Oh yeah,
thing.
go ahead, Preston.
There is also a book, I've never read it. It's called The Testament of Job, and it goes into a lot more detail. How much of it is actually scriptural? Sure. It's non-canonical, but it's out there.
Right, absolutely. Pick up the microphone, Gracie. It's right next to you. Go ahead.
Well, I just got a question.
Okay.
You said Deuteronomy 13:18?
No, both Deuteronomy 13 and Deuteronomy 18. I don't know if it's and or. I would need to look that up. Somebody can correct me on that. But it gives you the requirements for a prophet who speaks in the name of Yah, and that is a test of whether he is speaking from Yah. Okay, and that's why they were given a sign or a wonder. Okay, but and this is what you see with so many of the prophets, Yah had already spoken so many times that it was perfectly legitimate for a prophet to stand up and say, "Thus saith the Lord," and just quote Deuteronomy or something. That's the truth. That is straight from the Lord. Did I need to hear it directly from the Lord? No, I did not. I just needed to say it because it's true. That is a prophet. Remember that God himself calls Abraham a prophet. He didn't prophesy the future or anything like that. David, go ahead.
I was just going to say I agree with what you're asserting because I think Job is actually quoted throughout the Old Testament. It appears many times in Psalms. I think it appears in Proverbs. I think it's even quoted in like Jeremiah.
Yeah.
So I'm agreeing with what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not just saith the Lord, right? That's what we associate. But I agree with what the other gentleman said as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So Carla said, when you speak Yah's word, you do have supernatural power and insights to the future, etc. This is very true. We just don't always see ourselves in that category of prophets, but as you outline it, his word is what gives us all that ability. So yes, you very well could be considered a prophet. Now, I know that sounds weird, and I would never go around calling myself a prophet. Or if somebody said, "You're a prophet," I would say, "No, I'm not." But I would say we need to have a better understanding of who the prophets are and what they did. And we count those blessed who endured. We count them blessed because of the two things that I just talked about, which is fierce loyalty to Yah without regard for the consequences. And boy, I'll tell you what, how many of you have looked at your own selves, looked at your own lives, and said to yourself, man, if I could just have that, if I could just somehow have this fierce loyalty to Yah and just disregard everything else with no fear of the consequences, what would I do? That's a great question to ask yourself. Now, the second part of verse 11 says, you have heard of the endurance of Job and have seen the terminus of Yah, which is quite interesting. This is literally in the Greek, it says, seen, you have seen, that's ido, and terminus is telos. Christ is the end of the law, telos. It's the end, the goal line, the terminus point, the point that we're trying to reach. Now, what's interesting is that ido in Greek can mean to see with the eye, but most importantly, it says the definition talks about can be experienced, not just seen, but known experientially. And I think that when you say, when James tells us that you have seen the terminus of Yah, that he is full of compassion and is merciful, that could be taken in multiple ways. That means you have read the scriptures and you know the prophecies of the end. You have an insight into the prophecies of the end times, and you know how this thing is going to come about. And so you've seen the terminus point, and you know that Yah is full of compassion. But I think if you look at it from the alternate reading of Ido, you are talking about knowing experientially. This is what is fantastic about the Word of Yah and about the way He deals with us. Not only can we read in His scriptures what is the end point of all this stuff, that's the point that we were talking about for the last couple of weeks, is that we know what it is that we're looking forward to. We have all these promises which fill our hearts and minds with hope and faith and courage. But you know what's even more real and more realistic for us is that we can know the end point of God experientially. Why? Because you've seen it, experienced it in your own life. How have you seen it and experienced it in your own life? Because you, just like Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for good for those who love Yah and are dedicated according to His purpose. I don't know how many times you've seen it in your life, but I've seen it in my life, where things that I thought were bad turned out for good. That everything around me may have seemed tragic at the time. I have seen in my own life things turn out well. I hope that you have too. If you haven't seen things turn out well, I would propose to you that it's because you're blind. It's not because they haven't happened to you. Frankly, is what I'm going to say. Mike? Preach it, brother.
Yeah, hearing you kind of phrase it that way, it really sounds like a bookend to chapter 1, right? Like we went through, count it all joy when you go through these trials, and
Yes.
produces faith and steadfastness, and you let that patience have its full effect, that you may become perfect and complete, lacking nothing.
Absolutely.
So they kind of sandwich each other, I guess, for this book of James.
Yeah, beautifully spoken, beautifully spoken. Tracy?
Just going back to that, you've seen the end or telos of Yahovah, that he's full of compassion and mercy. Regarding Job, Job 42:10, it says that at the end of all this suffering, that Yahovah gave Job twice as much as he had before. Verse 12 saying, so that he blessed the latter end of Job more than his beginning. Yeah. And just kind of, clinging to that for ourselves, where it's like, we have a beginning here. This earth age is not our home. This is our flesh. This is not who we are. Yeah. It's whether we're going to live this life for Him now. Yeah. And if we endure, we know that our end is going to be in the same vein, because that's what He's teaching us here, so that our latter end will be better. And this reminds me also of the parable of the talents, where it's like, see what I did with what you gave me. He's well done, good and faithful servant. And then he, doubles whatever they did. So it's whatever that means. I just think that that's something that we really need to cling to, that our latter end, this goal that we're trying to reach, is to live with the Messiah and his kingdom.
Yes, absolutely brilliant. And I'm going to touch on another tiny point that's connected to that in just a moment, Tracy, but I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. Thank you. Great insight, you guys. So I think we want to just look at the prophets. And I think, we're going to read about a couple of these prophets here in just a second. And I want to share a passage with you that I think is just super encouraging and awesome. But man, study these guys. Study them. Who are they? What did they do? Why did they do it? How did things turn out for them? How did they suffer? How did they suffer? That's the key question that you want to ask yourself. Now, I know that Elijah lost patience, and he went to Yah and he said, man, I'm the last one and they're trying to kill me. He's like, dude, chill out, man. I got 7,000 people who have not bowed the knee to Baal. You're not the only one. But can it feel like you're the only one out there sometimes who is trying to faithfully serve Yah? Yes, it can. But here's the interesting thing. 7,000 people who have not bowed the knee to Baal. How many millions were in that country at that time? That is a tiny remnant. Somebody told me one time, this was like 20 years ago, that God always saves and is working for a faithful remnant. And I think he said, when you see that faithful remnant in times to come, you're going to be shocked at how small it is. Now you might be hearing me say, are you saying, Alan, that of all the people of God throughout all the ages, that only a tiny little fraction are going to be saved? No, that is not what I said. I said the remnant is a devout and faithful remnant of people who are fiercely dedicated to Yah, regardless of the consequences. There are very few of those. Very, very few. So that's what I'm saying. But this brings me to something that I want to share with you, which is Hebrews 11. You know that we had to go to Hebrews 11. This is the Hall of Faith. This is talking about all of these promises that people had that they were clinging to. All these characters in the Bible were clinging to all these promises that they received from Father that they did not get, but they kept going anyway. I am going to read for you Hebrews, the end of chapter 10 and 11. It's just so good, we really need to read it together. It's a mighty encouragement. So let's do that. It's story time with Uncle Alan. You ready? Hebrews chapter 10, starting in verse 32. Hebrews 10:32 starts this way. But remember the former days when, after being enlightened, you endured a great conflict of sufferings, partly by being made a public spectacle through reproaches and tribulations, and partly by becoming sharers with those who were so treated. For you showed sympathy to the prisoners and accepted joyfully the seizure of your property, knowing that you have for yourselves a better possession and a lasting one, abiding one. Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward, for you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of Elohim, you may receive what was promised. For yet in a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faithfulness. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faithfulness to the preservation of our souls. Now, faith is the assurance of things that are hoped for, the conviction about things that are not seen. For by it the men of old gained approval. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of Elohim, so that what is seen was not made out of the things which are visible. By faith Abel offered to Elohim a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained the testimony that he was righteous, Elohim testifying about his gifts, and through faith, though he is dead, he still speaks. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death. And he was not found because Elohim took him up. For he obtained the witness that before his being taken up, he was pleasing to Elohim. And without faith or faithfulness, it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to Elohim must believe that he exists and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. By faith, Noah, being warned by Elohim about things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his whole household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance, and he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he lived as an alien in the land of promise and as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God himself. By faith, even Sarah herself received the ability to conceive, even beyond the proper time of life, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore also there was born of one man, and him as good as dead at that, as many descendants as the stars of heaven in number, and innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. All these died in faith, without receiving the promises, but having seen them, and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, then they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desired a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore Elohim is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promise was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, "In Isaac shall your descendants be called." He considered that Elohim was able to raise men even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type. By faith Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. By faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, and worshiping leaned on the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of Elohim than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of the Messiah greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking for the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn might not touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient, after she had welcomed the spies in peace. And what more shall we say? For time will fail me if I mention Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, performed acts of righteousness, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, from weakness were made strong, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection, and others were tortured, not accepting their release, in order that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others experienced mockings and scourgings, yes, also chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were put to death with the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, men of whom the world was not even worthy, wandering in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. And all of these, having gained approval through their faith, did not receive what was promised, because Elohim had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. That's it right there, guys. That is, I know that was a long reading, and I really appreciate your patience, but man, look at that long litany of all these people who persevered believing the promises of Yah in spite of not seeing the results. That's an encouragement. That's a real encouragement. And I would say to fix your hope on these things, okay? All these people lived by faith. That is, they believed the promises that were not evident. They trusted in the one who made the promises, and they were faithful while they waited. That is our goal. That is what we should look to as we look to these examples of these prophets and these great men of old, that we see and we try to continue in their footsteps. Angela? Brett? Thank you.
Are you waiting for me?
Mm-hmm.
What you just read seems to tie to what you had just said before that about you
That's
said.
why I read it.
I know, but I wanted to point out how I saw it tie.
Yes, please.
I think you talked about a remnant, and you said that it's fewer than you think, and that those we tend to think because of our black and white, like heaven or hell, thinking that those are saved or not.
Right.
But I think, and when you said remnant, what I was thinking was the ones that are instrumental in bringing in the fullness of the flock. That there's like a group of shepherds would be the remnant.
Yeah.
And they
sure.
would bring in the rest. And when you read that thing in Hebrews just now, it's like all the things that were listed that these faithful did in faith resulted in the restoration. If you look at each of those situations, it was one person doing something that rescued or restored or saved, quote unquote, multitudes. And so you had one person whose actions resulted in the salvation, quote unquote, again, for many. And in that, when you're following that litany, he talks about this restoration thing. And I'm like, okay, so where's resurrection? Because if it's Elijah and Job, resurrection and restoration, where's the resurrection? And as you got to the end of that passage, it said specifically resurrection. And it's not, and it almost pointed to this idea that this is not for you in your time. This is for the end of time for everyone. And it's this corporate type of thinking. It's not about you and saving your skin. It's about what you do to contribute to the end of the line where the corporate body is saved, restored, resurrected, and things go back to
the garden.
Harmony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a great insight, Angela. I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think that you're absolutely right that phrase in verse 40 there, that, you know, he's basically saying all of these people did not receive what they were promised because the patience of God was waiting for you at the end of the age. He was not going to bring the promise to those people. He's telling them to wait patiently because I got a bunch more people that I'm trying to bring into the fold here. And, you know, you mentioned, Angela, that we often, and I think that this is a part of our own Western culture, that we look at ourselves so often, and wrongfully so to a big degree, as individuals. We have no collective, would you get that over to him, please? We have no collective consciousness at all. You know what I'm saying? We really lack a collective consciousness. And I think it's unfortunate, and so much so that we only... Right. We can't hardly do that with our family members. We're so concerned about ourselves. We are absorbed completely with selfishness. It's a sign and a symptom of our culture, especially in America. It is so, I mean, it was founded on a fierce individualism. And I'm all for individualism. I think, you know, taking responsibility for yourself is the great thing about individualism. But you can begin to worship perhaps that individualism to the point where you get to like a philosopher like Ayn Rand, who says, I don't need anyone else. I can do everything myself. Well, man, we really lose that communal, congregational perspective where we're really supposed to be serving each other. And I remember all these times going to church, I'm church hopping to 50 churches looking for the one that meets my needs. I got to have the right music. I got to have the right pastor. I was talking about this with Angela this very morning, where I was talking about we used to go to this church and the pastor was always telling the people, man, you guys need to examine yourselves. You need to examine yourselves because your behavior may not comport with what it's supposed to be. And you know what? We left that church because we got tired of that pastor telling us to examine ourselves. We felt guilt and shame, and we didn't want to feel guilt and shame. We wanted to be encouraged. We wanted to be built up in our faith. We wanted to be filled with knowledge. We didn't want somebody calling us out and telling us that we weren't behaving correctly. So we left. And I literally this morning was thinking to myself, I know that pastor's still over there, and I know him personally. I need to go and apologize to him. Because you know what I'm doing now? I'm calling all you out. And I'm saying, hey, examine yourselves. Examine what you're doing and how you're doing it. Not because you're not saved, not because I'm afraid you're going to go to hell or something, but because you are a representative of the King. And some of you are not living like it. And I'm just saying, nobody likes to hear this. It's not, you ain't going to build a congregation with a message like this. I can tell you that. I make jokes with other pastors sometimes because I know a few pastors and we talk. I'm like, you can tell where the truth is being preached because there ain't nobody there. I'm serious. That's the joke that I make with these pastors of small churches. It's like, you know where the truth is being taught because there's nobody there. Jerry, I apologize for getting long-winded.
Okay.
What you probably forgot what you were going to say. Go ahead.
I think that something to go along with what Angela said is the fifth, I believe it's the fifth seal in Revelation. When they open that up, there's a bunch of people there that had been killed during the
Yes.
tribulation period,
And he tells them
saying,
to
"How
wait
much longer?
patiently.
How much longer is
Yes.
it going to be?" And Christ or whoever's talking to them said, "You got to wait a little bit longer because there's a few more people, or a lot more people that
Yeah.
have come in, that have got to come into the fold before we can resurrect or the rapture happens or whatever."
There you go. You're absolutely right. That's a beautiful insight, Jerry.
I think about like 1 Corinthians 15:19, where it's
Get that. You can't talk without a microphone. These people can't hear you online.
people
Thanks.
they forget about living righteously. Like Job, his very name means persecuted, and that's what, when you live righteously, you shall be persecuted. And we, like the prophets, would be men most miserable if we didn't have the expectation.
Right.
And that's,
Yep.
look at your life.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I really thought it was great what Angela was talking about. And I really want to encourage you guys, and I have been for years, about a decade now. We have to live for each other. We really have to live for each other. We have to pray for each other. We have to call each other. We have to encourage each other. We have to hold each other accountable. And then we need to move outside. I'm not talking about being an evangelist necessarily. I'm talking about speaking the truth and acting out the truth and being an example of the people around you, and perhaps being a missionary, a witness, an evangelist, telling people, hey, pay attention.
I think what that brings to mind, I don't know where it's found, but my focus said we were supposed to be instant, in season and out of season. And that means be always between you and the Lord so that he can use you without even seeing it coming. Just be there.
Be ready. In season and out of season. Absolutely. Bob, speak it, brother.
Yeah, question. You were talking about being able to stay in touch with each other and encourage each other. Is there a call tree for us to be able to do that within our own group here?
Yes, thank you very much for bringing that up, Bob. We are actually in the midst of working on that right now. Evelyn had brought that to my attention about a month ago. And I do have the server set up to begin being able to do that, to stay in touch and have our own little bulletin board type service where we can have one that's specific to prayer requests, another that's specific to praise reports, a place where you can chat, you can do video calls, you can send documents to each other. I need to figure out the ground rules for how that's going to work, because that could be a disaster. There's potentially great danger there, but there's also it's also encrypted, but there's also great benefit. Looks like with anything with technology, there's great power and potential for good, and there's great potential for harm too. So we're going to be dealing with that shortly. Thank you, Bob. Did you want to say something else? Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah. Hey, David, I think there's something there for you and I to help him with.
Yeah. And if you have...
Both of us were in the IT field.
Okay, yeah, and I know brother Bart is also in the IT field. So I have a lot of technology skill. I am not an IT specialist, though, but I'm definitely happy to have any help that you guys want to offer. But yes, you are correct. That is a really important thing, and we are going to be rolling that out for sure in the next month or so. So be considering that and prayerfully consider that. I'm going to move forward and we're going to wrap this up. I've had you here for about an hour. I apologize for the tardiness, but let me just bring this up, okay? So Job, just wrapping up with Job, he suffered from external sources. There was no apparent sin found in him. We know that he was obviously a sinner, but it says that he did not suffer. He did not sin with his mouth. His behavior in suffering was exemplary. He didn't complain. He didn't lash out, and he was entirely restored. Now, Job 42, I was actually going to read this to you because it's so fascinating. It says, Job 42:10 says, "And Yah restored the fortunes of Job when he prayed for his friends, and Yah increased all that Job had twofold. Then all his brothers and all his sisters and all who had known him before came to him, and they ate bread with him in his house, and they consoled him and comforted him for all the evil that Yah had brought on him. And each one gave him one piece of money, and each a ring of gold. And Yah blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning. And he had 14,000 sheep and 6,000 camels and 1,000 yoke of oxen and 1,000 female donkeys. And he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he named the first," and I would encourage you to do a little bit of research on these daughters and their names. It's as to why this author would bring out why the daughters. They almost never bring up the daughters in Scripture. Why are the 3 daughters of Job named? Okay, so he named the first Jemima, and the second Keziah, and the third Keren Hapuk. And in all the land no women were found so fair as Job's daughters, and their father gave them inheritance among their brothers. Talking about the daughters of Zelophehad. If you can do a little bit of a comparison there. And after this, Job lived 140 more years and saw his sons and his grandsons 4 generations. And Job died, an old man and full of days. Now, the reason that I brought that up, that's so fascinating about that, aside from Job's daughters, but this is a great picture of the ultimate restoration. And I think that you've probably heard this before, but what does the Torah say if you steal something from someone? What's the payment?
1/5 more.
1/5 more. In some cases, it depends on what was stolen.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it depends on the value of it. If something a little bit more valuable was stolen, the payment is double. Okay, but a general theft is 1/5 more.
Steal somebody's wife and everything.
That's right. So now the question becomes, and this is something that you need to encourage yourself with, anything that the adversary has been allowed by the Father to take from you will be paid back double. That's the Torah law. Do you think that the Father is going to hold everyone accountable to the Torah law? Yes, He is. Anything that the adversary has taken from you will be paid back, more than likely, double. That's your hope of restoration that you get from the book of Job, that you get from the example of Job. Hang in there patiently, grin and bear it, hold on to your faith, knowing that whatever bad has happened to you, you're going to be paid back double.
And don't take
And don't take anything from anybody else too, because you'll owe double. That's a good point. So that's just a great prophetic picture of the ultimate restoration and stuff like that. Now, I just want to deal with one final verse, because the next time we get to James and start talking about the next section, that's when things are all going to go crazy, and we're going to have some quite fascinating discussions about that. But this passage right here is super weird, and it bugs the crap out of me. James 5:12 says, "But above all, my brethren," and think about the context. We've been talking about suffering, and we're still going to be talking about suffering in the verses after this. "Above all, my brethren, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth, or with any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no, no, so that you may not fall under judgment." Why is this passage here? What does this have to do with suffering? What does it have to do with patience and endurance? Swearing and oath? What is going on here? David, hold on a second. Gracie, go.
I just think that it may have to do with, if you're going to suffer, make sure you're not doing something wrong that you're being disciplined for, but that you're doing what you're supposed to do with gritted teeth if you have to, but you're still doing what you know God wants you to do.
Okay, thank you. David?
I was going to say, I think that there are difficult days ahead, and that I believe that people for the belief will be persecuted, and you may be brought in front of judges. And so this is not about swearing, like using the Lord's name in vain. It's more like, if you were in front of a judge, that let your yes be yes and your no be no, and you're not supposed to be swearing by anything, right? I see it more as in a court of law.
That is entirely possible, yes. Preston?
Sure. I think he's referring to an emotional state of mind. When we start swearing, when you start swearing, I swear by this and I swear by that, because you're not centered anymore. So I think he's trying to say, keep it together. You really don't have to swear, because if you're staying focused in the Lord, you don't need to fly off the handle and start taking oaths and swearing.
Okay, excellent. Tracy?
Oh.
Oh, sorry. Just one sec. Hold on to that thought. Don't lose it. Tracy?
I think he's actually quoting Messiah directly, who said this very thing in Matthew 5.
Yes, he is.
And when Messiah said it, he was quoting the Torah, saying, "You've heard it said, you shall not swear falsely."
Right.
But I'm saying, don't swear at all. It's the same kind of thing with like judging, in my opinion, from how I read this. It's like, just be a man of your word. Let your yes be yes, let your no be no. And then he goes into all this detail about, why you're swearing a heaven. Don't swear by heaven. That's Elohim's throne. Earth is his footstool. Yep. Jerusalem is the city of the great king.
Yeah, it's almost an exact. It's almost an exact quotation.
One hair white or black.
Yeah. It's really close to an exact quotation. He's just kind of paraphrasing exactly what the Messiah said. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. So go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, there's also...
Where's the microphone?
Right here.
Well, get it up to your pie hole.
There's also a lot of organizations that require oaths, and there's consequences with those oaths.
Yeah.
Do you swear to support and defend who and what?
That's true. Very true. Okay, Jerry, did you want to say something? Give that over to Jerry. Thank you.
Well, don't swear by heaven, because you don't own heaven.
That's right.
Don't swear by the earth, because you don't own the earth.
Right.
Make a promise if you've got the ability to keep that promise, but if you don't make it.
Yeah.
Because people are going to look at you as a liar and a thief and all kinds of other things.
Right.
Especially when it comes to borrowing money.
Yeah.
I promise
Absolutely.
I'll pay you back, and 10 years later you still haven't seen it.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
To me, it's just like make a promise that you can't keep.
Okay, give that to Angela. Tracy, you're going next. Thank you.
That's pretty much what I was thinking. Is just the same reason he says don't judge is, we know we can judge, but you have to know how to judge righteously. So it's the same type of thing and James is saying here, that you don't fall under judgment, because you will be judged in the same way that you judged.
Yeah.
So if you're going to swear by something and you don't live up to that, that's why I've always taught my daughter, never say you're going to do something, especially to God. Don't make those prayers. I swear if you'll just do this, I'll do this. Don't do that.
Yes, absolutely.
You know,
Well,
because
it's- Yeah,
that
absolutely.
you have to live up to.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you said, you said that you may not fall under judgment. We're going to talk about that phrase in just a second. And if you want to, while you're waiting, look that up in the Greek, because it does not say fall under judgment. Angela?
Well, I was thinking, that it's about talking and doing, because it almost seems like don't. You know how you can say you're going to do, like she just said, you can say you're going to do something, and sometimes it feels like just saying it, then it feels like it's done.
Yes.
But it's not. It's like if I said I was going to exercise today, and then I got this satisfaction about saying it and announcing it to someone, I didn't actually do it. So I'm not going to experience the results from that. And it almost reminds me of the parable about the guy who said he wouldn't, but then did, and the other guy who said he
would, but then didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about talking and doing.
Right. Right. I think that's a good insight for sure, because I think that that's probably the best that I could summarize. I mean, Christian commentators and Bible commentators are thoroughly confused about what to do with this passage. They're all recognizing that it's important. They have no idea how it relates to the context, but they're like, well, it just means, you're supposed to be a person of honor and truth, and you shouldn't need to swear oaths because you're known to be so honorable and truthful that no one would even expect you to take an oath. Like one of the Quakers, they would talk about the Quakers, about how they're just so faithful you would never hear an oath. And then, of course, they would descend into anti-Semitism by saying, oh, those Jews, those evil Jews are swearing oaths all the time, So, the Christian commentators are just all kinds of wrapped around the axle on this passage. But I think that Angela and Tracy brought up some really good points and if you look, and I'll bring this to your attention at this point, that it literally does not say fall under judgment in the text. What does it say, Tracy?
Hypocrisy. And that's really the point that I was making, is that
exactly.
you're going to be one who says and does not do.
That's right.
Now, I also wanted to clarify something I said, just that I have said those prayers before. And I just want to make the point that if you do say those prayers, that you do follow through. Don't be a hypocrite. Yes,
absolutely. It does not say that so that you may not fall under judgment. It's so that you may not fall under hypocrisy. I don't know why they translated it as judgment. It's hypocrisy. It's just as plain as day. David?
I think Jesus gives us a nice illustration right before he's crucified, but Peter says, I'd follow you anywhere. And he was like, you're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows. And by the way, if it's follow you to the death, well, he had to follow through on that promise.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, absolutely.
That's man's natural way of bone twisting of truth. And
twisting the truth, absolutely. And so, and I'm going to show you, just as this is what Tracy was talking about a moment ago. This is that passage from Matthew 5:33. It says, again, you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not make false vows, but you shall fulfill your vows to Yah. But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of Elohim, or by the earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you make an oath by your own head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond these is of evil. But then you go back to Deuteronomy 6:13, and it says, you shall fear Yah, your Elohim, and you shall worship him and swear by his name. So you could actually read that to be, I don't think that this is a command that you are, this is like one of those positive commandments where it's like you're supposed to swear by Yah's name, but that you, well, we won't deal with that entirely, but we know that Yeshua and James are not abrogating the Torah and changing it, saying, oh, the Torah was okay with you making an oath, but now Yeshua and James following up are saying, we're changing that. Don't do that anymore. I don't think that's what it means. I think that hypocrisy is the ultimate objective here, to make sure that we're not falling into hypocrisy. And I think that if you look at what you have to do is you got to sort through this, which is what you always have to do with Scripture. Always, and we'll get, next thing we're going to be studying is how to study the Bible. That's our next study, by the way. And you want to have this in your back pocket as you're studying the Bible, asking yourself these questions always. What is this guy talking about? So you back up and you think about what oaths. Okay, what is swearing with an oath? It's basically, if you look at, you can look at all these, you can look at the word oath or swearing in the New Testament and the Old Testament, and you can see, and in almost every case, it's someone saying, I will or I will not. And they attach the invocation of a deity, a highly esteemed person, or an item of greatly perceived value to affirm the truthfulness of the statement. So it really is about an affirmation of speaking the truth. That's what an oath and swearing with an oath is. Now, what are the reasons for swearing an oath? You might be at a promise of speaking truthfully as a witness in a court of law or something like that. You put your hand on the Bible, you say, I swear to tell the whole truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It could be a promise of allegiance. One thing that occurred to me in this, I'm just throwing this out there for your consideration, that sometimes, and I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, that if persecution increases and something or someone comes up with a program or something else that offers you freedom from persecution, and you, not directly and openly, but spiritually swear allegiance to that other force, entity, whatever it is, in order to escape the difficulty that you're facing, that would be idolatry. That would be moving, swearing an oath of allegiance to something other than Yah, switching your allegiance due to your persecution or your suffering. Any of you think that might be a possibility? Think about the great falling away when persecution happens, especially with people who really firmly believe that they were going to be sucked off the planet before anything bad happened. And then now they're faced with the fact of, oh my gosh, I'm here and it's happening, and what am I going to do? Do you think some of those people might fall away by swearing an oath of allegiance to some other god, some other system, something that seems religious? A fake Jesus, perhaps? I don't know. That was one thing that occurred to me. But bargaining promises with God. This is what Tracy has spoken about a moment ago. Whereas you know how it is when you get into trouble. You're often going to perhaps say, Father, if you will just get me out of this, I will do A, B, and C or whatever. Do you know how, you ever done that? I think everybody has. You get faced with some difficulty and you make a promise. Tracy, go, girl.
I was just looking at Numbers 30, verse 2. I don't know if this is on your list at all. But when a man vows a vow to Yahovah or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he does not break his word. He does according to all that comes out of his mouth. And this makes me think about, the persecution of people who will just say, deny your faith or we'll kill you. That's kind of happened over time. And
yep.
When you confess with your mouth, you are making this agreement with God that He is you're entering into covenant with Him.
Yes.
when you accept Him, when you accept the Messiah. And so, this is a serious thing. Like if you were to denounce with your mouth, it goes straight to God's ears.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, Tracy, because that was one of the main points that I wanted to make here. And you and I taught together about that probably 6 or 7 years ago. Taking the name of Yah in vain. And I think that most people don't recognize, and by gosh, I wish that pastors who do altar calls would really begin to think about this. If you want to come up and do an altar call and you want to, say the sinner's prayer, you need to tell these people what they're actually doing. If you are willing to stand up in public and say, and raise your hand and say, yes, I do want to accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. I want to forsake my ways and I want to get into heaven. By gosh, you do not recognize that you're swearing an oath of fealty to the King of the universe. And he takes that very, very seriously. If you say that, and by gosh, you go even further and you make a public demonstration, not only by going up in front of the church and having them put their hands on you and praying, you have made public declaration. Then you go one step further and you get baptized publicly as a symbolic act of a washing of regeneration, and you join that covenant of faith, and then you fall away? You turn away? It wasn't that serious to you? No one even really told you the seriousness? I mean, that would literally be like you should tell people, look, man, we want you to come to Jesus. We want you to be saved. But I need to tell you in advance, do not do this unless you are dead serious, because I'll tell you what, if you do it and then you turn your back on him, he'll kill you. This is no joke. I don't mean literally like right now, you turn your back on him, he'll kill you, but he will. He'll kill you at some point, some way, somehow. You're going to bring all these curses on yourself. I don't know if you've read Deuteronomy 26, 27, 28. Those are still valid. You turn your back on this God that you've sworn an oath of fealty to, what do you think's going to happen? Bad stuff.
But I look at it as a loving father. He's trying to drive you back to him.
Yes.
So that it's
it's like a spanking.
If he destroys you mercifully, like he can destroy those who didn't. But
yes.
if you don't tell them about the truth, then they won't know. So I mean, for me, even if the worst of society, people don't want to tell them, I'll go and I'll tell them about Yeshua, because honestly,
yeah,
he's going to reach even the lowest of the low, and they're going to be destroyed otherwise.
Right. Thank you for that. Hold on just one sec. Carla was asking about the Greek word. Tracy, can you give us the Greek word? She's not seeing that in her interlinear Bible, the Greek word for the hypocrisy. I think it's hypocrizo, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. You covered that in the study.
Okay. I think, did you get that, Carla? I think it's hypocrizo.
Yeah, it's the same Greek, same word for all the times when Messiah says hypocrites.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, it's hypocriso or something like that.
Yeah,
I'm just trying
I thought
to
it was
pull it back up
hypocrizo
again.
or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Gracie.
Well, what you were talking
Hypocrisis.
about brings up the
Thank
question
you.
of if someone is responding to an invitation, does that mean giving a public invitation at the end of a service is wrong?
No, it's not wrong to make a public invitation. I just think sometimes we do it. Sometimes we seem to do it a little bit willy-nilly, and we're not letting these people know. If I were doing an altar call, if I was a pastor of a church and I said, "Hey, is anybody interested in experiencing the salvation of God and accepting Jesus?" and somebody raised their hand and they'd say, "Come up, we'll pray with you, we'll talk with you." Walk them through very carefully. I want you to understand what we're talking about here. I don't want you to just get caught up emotionally in the moment. I want you to understand really clearly what I'm talking about here and how serious this is. And Brett was absolutely right. We're not talking about a vengeful father who will just destroy you if you turn your back on him. Brett is absolutely right when what he's saying is, your father is now locked onto you. He will hound you. He will punish you. He will send you all kinds of difficulties trying to get your attention so that you'll turn around, because he desperately wants to save you. You would have to fight him all the way to the grave. He will fight for you. But it might seem like he hates you. It might feel like he hates you, but he doesn't. He's trying to get your attention badly because he wants to call you back to the oath that you made, to restore you to that first love that you felt for him. Angela, go.
Oh, I wanted to bounce off of something that Brett said earlier.
Okay.
Something about bringing in who you're bringing in. Because when you were talking, I don't know, I was thinking about the dragnet thing.
Oh, okay.
That maybe maybe sometimes, maybe some of us at the end, or some of you, are supposed to be the dragnet that's pulling in these fish, the clean and the unclean. And then some are the fish. And some of them are clean fish. And then someone else does the sorting. It's not the dragnet that does the sorting. It's not us that does the sorting. It's not the,
Well, it's not
the
plucking mups
angels.
lest you
Right.
unseat
We're
the
just,
wheat.
and for some reason all day I've been thinking, it just feels like it's getting close to the end, and you gotta just go ahead and, like, what
Bring
is
'em
that
in.
called when you do the bottom of the barrel?
Dredging the bottom of the barrel.
Dredge the canal for the last, because
Yeah.
he wants multitudes.
Yeah.
And so let him sort the fish out.
You just bring 'em in.
If you're good enough, you can be a piece of that net.
Yeah.
And or maybe you're just one of those fish that sticks to the net and hopes you get sorted out the right way. But I think that sometimes we our expectations, when we look at the guy next to us, we think, well, you need to be as righteous as I am. It's like, no, you just need to stick to the net. We're right at the end here. Just stick to the net until the end, and we'll all make it through. It doesn't matter that you were the worker hired at the last second.
Yeah.
Let's just grab as many people as we can and make it through.
Try to stick to
make
the
it
net.
across the finish line.
I like that. That's a good one. And we'll end with that comment right there. I've kept you long enough. I really appreciate your patience, ladies and gentlemen. It is delightful to have gotten back together again.